Welcome to Math with Mr. J. In this video, I'm going to cover how to add and subtract decimals. We will work through some example problems together, and then at the end, I'll give you some practice problems that you can try on your own. We'll work through problems involving two decimals, and then also problems involving decimals and whole numbers. We'll start with addition. Let's jump into number 1, where we have 5 and 7/10 plus 3 and 9/10. Now, our first step when adding decimals is to line up the decimals. So we're going to set this problem up by, again, lining up the decimals. So 5 and 7/10 plus 3 and 9/10. So you can see that those decimals are lined up. And that's going to line up all of the places. So for this example, the ones place and the tenths place. Now our second step is to use placeholder zeros if necessary. Now for number 1, we're not going to use any placeholder zeros. We don't need them. But for numbers 2 and 3, we will. So we will see what those are used for in our next examples. Now we move on to step 3, and that's to add. We'll start with 7 plus 9. That gives us 16. So we just added the tenths place. Now after the tenths place, we need the decimal, and we bring that straight down. So the decimal is lined up throughout the entire problem, even in the answer. Now we add the ones place. So 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 3 is 9. And that's our final answer, 9 and 6/10. So let's write this up here. 5 and 7/10 plus 3 and 9/10 equals 9 and 6/10. Let's move on to number 2, where we have 16 and 5/10 plus 8 and 83/100. So our first step, we need to line up the decimals. So 16 and 5/10 plus 8 and 83/100. So our decimals are lined up here, but this does look a little offset. It doesn't quite look like we are lined up. That's because 16 and 5/10 goes to the tenths place and 8 and 83/100 goes to the hundredths. Although it may not look like we are lined up, we are. The decimals and the places are lined up. So since 16 and 5/10 only goes to the tenths place and 8 and 83/100 goes to the hundredths, we can use a placeholder 0 right here after the 5. That way we have 16 and 50/100. Now both of the decimals go to the hundredths place. This helps everything look a little more organized and lined up. It will help us when adding. Now remember, zeros to the right of decimal digits do not change the value of a number. So 16 and 50/100 is equivalent to 16 and 5/10. We're not changing the value of anything here. So we're able to do this. Now we add. So we'll start with the hundredths place. We have 0 plus 3. That's 3. Then we have 5 plus 8. That's 13. Bring the decimal straight down into our answer. Now we have 1 plus 6, which is 7, plus 8 is 15. And then 1 plus 1 is 2. So we end up with 25 and 33/100. So 16 and 5/10 plus 8 and 83/100 equals 25 and 33/100. Moving on to number 3, we have 24 and 297/1000 plus 7 and 9/10. Let's line up the decimals here. So 24 and 297/1000 plus 7 and 9/10. So now our decimals are lined up, therefore our places are lined up. And we can use placeholder zeros now. That way both decimals go to the thousandths place. So we'll use 2 placeholder zeros after the 9. And now we're ready to add. We'll start with the thousandths place. 7 plus 0 is 7. 9 plus 0 is 9. 2 plus 9 is 11. And we can bring the decimal straight down. Then we have 1 plus 4 is 5, plus 7 is 12. 1 plus 2 is 3, and we are done. We end up with 32 and 197 thousandths. Now, I've been bringing the decimal down as we're working through the addition, but another option is add everything and then bring your decimal straight down into the answer. Either way will work, just don't forget to place that decimal in the answer. So 24 and 297 thousandths plus 7 and 9 tenths equals 32 and 197 thousandths. So those are our examples of adding two decimals. Let's move on to our next section. So here's our section on adding decimals and whole numbers. So we will either have a decimal plus a whole number or a whole number plus a decimal. Now, whenever we have an addition problem involving a decimal and a whole number, so either a decimal plus a whole number or a whole number plus a decimal, we use the same steps that we use when adding two decimals. We line up the decimals, use placeholder zeros, and add. Let's jump into number 1, where we have 17 and 43 hundredths plus 8. So let's set this problem up by lining up the decimals. So we have 17 and 43 hundredths plus 8. Now, how do we line up the decimal for our whole number here? 8. Well, remember, decimals come after a whole number. They come after the ones place. So the decimal is right here for 8. So we have 8 and then the decimal. So our decimals are lined up now, and our problem is lined up. But it does look a little offset since 17 and 43 hundredths goes to the hundredths place, and 8 only has a digit in the ones place. So we can use two placeholder zeros after the decimal. That way 8 goes to the hundredths place as well. Now, those two zeros to the right of the decimal are not changing the value of 8. That still has a value of 8. So we're able to do this. Now our problem looks more lined up. And now we can add. We will start with the hundredths place. So 3 plus 0 gives us 3. 4 plus 0 gives us 4. Bring the decimal straight down. It's lined up throughout the entire problem. Then we have 7 plus 8, that's 15, and then 1 plus 1 gives us 2. So we end up with 25 and 43 hundredths. So 17 and 43 hundredths plus 8 equals 25 and 43 hundredths. Now, whenever we have an addition problem involving a decimal and a whole number, the decimal digits are going to stay the same. So for example, number 1, we end up with 43 hundredths. That's because 8 didn't have any decimal digits. So it's just going to be, again, 43 hundredths. Basically, we're just adding the whole numbers. 17 plus 8 is 25. And then again, we have 43 hundredths. So something to keep in mind whenever we are adding a decimal and a whole number. Moving on to number 2, we have 126 plus 35 and 9 tenths. Let's set this problem up by lining up the decimals. The decimal goes after the whole number, after the ones place. So for 126, it goes after the 6. So we have 126 decimal, and then we line up 35 and 9 tenths. So the decimals are now lined up. So let's use a placeholder 0 in the tenths place for 126. Now both of our numbers go to the tenths place and we can add. We will start by adding the tenths place. So 0 plus 9 gives us 9. Bring the decimal straight down. Then we have 6 plus 5. That's 11. Then we have 1 plus 2 is 3. Plus 3 is 6. And then a 1 in the hundreds place. So we end up with 161 and 9 tenths. So 126 plus 35 and 9 tenths equals 161 and 9 tenths. So there is how to add decimals. Let's move on to subtraction. Here's our section on subtracting decimals. Let's jump into number 1, where we have 7 and 4 tenths minus 2 and 9 tenths. Now, the first thing that we need to do when we have a subtraction problem involving decimals is to line up the decimals. So let's set up number 1 by lining up the decimals. So we have 7 and 4 tenths minus 2 and 9 tenths. So you can see that those decimals are lined up. And that's going to line up all of the places. So for this example, the ones place and the tenths place. Now our second step is to use placeholder zeros if necessary. Now for number 1, we're not going to use any placeholder zeros. We don't need them. But for numbers 2 and 3, we will. So we will see what those are used for in our next examples. So now we just subtract, starting with the tenths place. So we have 4 minus 9, which we are going to need to borrow here. So we borrow from the 7. This is now 6. And we end up with 14 minus 9, which gives us 5. Then we bring the decimal straight down into the answer. The decimal is going to be lined up throughout the entire problem. Then we move over to the ones place where we have 6 minus 2. That gives us 4. And this is our final answer, 4 and 5 tenths. So 7 and 4 tenths minus 2 and 9 tenths equals 4 and 5 tenths. Let's move on to number 2, where we have 18 and 61 hundredths minus 5 and 752 thousandths. So let's line this problem up. So we have 18 and 61 hundredths minus 5 and 752 thousandths. Now we move to our next step, so we need to use placeholder zeros here. Notice that our problem looks a little offset. It doesn't really look lined up, but we actually are because our decimals are lined up. Therefore, our places are lined up. It's just that 18 and 61 hundredths only goes to the hundredths place, and then 5 and 752 thousandths goes to the thousandths. So this looks a little offset. So what we need to do, we need to use a placeholder 0. That way, both of these numbers go to the thousandths place. Now our problem looks a little more lined up and organized. And we actually need that 0 in order to subtract here. We can't just bring that 2 straight down into our answer, because there's a 0 above that 2. So we need to go through the subtraction process. Now remember, zeros to the right of decimal digits do not change the value of the number. So 18.610 is equivalent to 18.61. So we're not changing the value of anything here. So we're able to do this. Now that we've lined up the decimals and used a placeholder 0, we can subtract. So let's start with the thousandths place. We have 0 minus 2, which we need to borrow. So let's borrow from the 1. This is now 0. And now we have 10 minus 2, which gives us 8. Now we have 0 minus 5. So we need to borrow again. And we end up with 10 minus 5. That gives us 5. Then we have 5 minus 7. We need to borrow again. And now we have 15 minus 7. That gives us 8. Bring the decimal straight down into our answer. And now we have 7 minus 5. That gives us 2. And then we have a 1 in the tens place. So this is our final answer. 12 and 858 thousandths. So 18 and 61 hundredths minus 5 and 752 thousandths equals 12 and 858 thousandths. Lastly, moving on to number 3, we have 49 and 237 thousandths minus 21 and 8 tenths. So let's line up the decimals here. 49 and 237 thousandths minus 21 and 8 tenths. Now that we have our decimals lined up, we can see that one of our numbers goes to the thousandths place and the other only goes to the tenths. So let's use placeholder zeros. That way, both of these go to the thousandths. So we'll need 2 placeholder zeros right here. And now both numbers go to the thousandths place and we are able to subtract. Let's start with the thousandths place here where we have 7 minus 0. That gives us 7. Then we have 3 minus 0. That gives us 3. Then we have 2 minus 8. So we need to borrow. And we end up with 12 minus 8, which gives us 4. Then we bring our decimal straight down into the answer. Next, we have 8 minus 1. That gives us 7. And then 4 minus 2 is 2. So we end up with 27 and 437 thousandths. So 49 and 237 thousandths minus 21 and 8 tenths gives us 27 and 437 thousandths. So there's our section on subtraction involving 2 decimals. Let's move on to decimals and whole numbers. Here's our section on subtraction problems involving decimals and whole numbers. So either a decimal minus a whole number or a whole number minus a decimal. Now, whenever we have a subtraction problem involving a decimal and a whole number, we use the same steps we use when subtracting 2 decimals. Line up the decimals, use placeholder zeros if necessary, and subtract. Let's jump into number 1, where we have 13 minus 4 and 64 hundredths. Our first step is going to be to set this problem up by lining up the decimals. Now we have a whole number here, 13. Remember, the decimal point goes to the right of the ones place, to the right of the whole number. So we can put a decimal point right here for 13 that we can use to line this problem up. Typically, if we just have a whole number, we write it without a decimal point. But here, we are using the decimal point to line up the problem. So we are including it. Now we can set this up. So we have 13 decimal point minus 4 and 64 hundredths. Now at this point, do not just bring the 6 and the 4 straight down into the answer. There are actually zeros above those digits, so we will need to go through the subtraction process. So our problem is lined up, the decimals are lined up, but it does look a little offset here. So we can use placeholder zeros to make this look a little more lined up and organized. And we actually need these zeros in order to go through the subtraction process. So since 4 and 64 hundredths goes to the hundredths place, we need 2 zeros right here. That way 13 goes to the hundredths place as well. Now those zeros to the right of the decimal point are not changing the value of that 13. That's still 13. So we're able to do this. We're not changing the value of anything here. Now we're ready to subtract. So let's start with the hundredths place. We have 0 minus 4. which we're going to need to borrow. So we need to go all the way over to the 3, borrow. This is now 2. Then we have 10 here, which is now 9. And then we end up with 10 minus 4, which gives us 6. Then we have 9 minus 6. That gives us 3. Then we have our decimal. Bring the decimal straight down into the answer. The decimal is lined up throughout the entire problem. Then we have 2 minus 4, which we need to borrow. So we borrow from this 1, which is now 0. And now we have 12 minus 4, which gives us 8. And this is our final answer, 8 and 36 hundredths. So 13 minus 4 and 64 hundredths equals 8 and 36 hundredths. Let's move on to number 2, where we have 28 and 8 tenths minus 9. So let's set this problem up by lining up the decimals. Now for our whole number, 9, the decimal goes right here. So we have 28 and 8 tenths minus 9, and then the decimal point. Now we need a placeholder 0. But before we write that in, notice the difference between number 1 and number 2. For number 1, we subtracted from the placeholder zeros, so we needed to borrow. For number 2, we're going to end up with 8 minus 0 in the tenths place, which gives us 8. So we will end up with 8 in the tenths place of our answer. So depending on if we have a whole number minus a decimal or a decimal minus a whole number, that impacts how these problems are going to work out. So something to keep in mind. Since 28 and 8 tenths goes to the tenths place, let's use a placeholder 0 right here. That way 9 goes to the tenths place as well. And now we can subtract. So we start with 8 minus 0 in the tenths place. That gives us 8. Then we can bring the decimal straight down. Next, we have 8 minus 9, which we need to borrow here. So this 2 is now a 1. And we have 18 minus 9. That gives us 9. And then we have a 1. So our final answer, 19 and 8 tenths. So 28 and 8 tenths minus 9 gives us 19 and 8 tenths. So that wraps up our example problems. Now it's time for you to try some practice problems on your own. So have paper and a pencil ready. Here are your practice problems. I'll give you 5 minutes and then we will go over the answers. Go ahead and start. Okay, so that was 5 minutes. Let's go over the answers. So here are our answers. For number 1, we should have 6 and 28 hundredths, so 6.28. For number 2, 11 and 32 hundredths, so 11.32. For number 3, 82 and 4 tenths, so 82.4. Moving on to number 4, we should have 15 and 63 hundredths, 15.63. For number 5, 51 and 155 thousandths, so 51.155. And then lastly, for number 6, 7 and 326 thousandths, so 7.326. Now feel free to pause at this point if you need to take a closer look at those answers. So there you have it. There's how to add and subtract decimals. I hope that helped. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, peace.